All right, so today we're diving deep into the world of blockchain. Well, not exactly the magic internet money part you might be thinking of. This is about something way more fundamental. We're talking the block space. Picture this. Just like a city needs real estate, a blockchain needs its own digital version. Think of it as the foundation, the bedrock of the entire system. And to help us unpack all this, we're turning to a recent Epicenter podcast episode. They talked with Leo Zhang, the CEO of Alkimiya. They're building a platform, kind of like a stock exchange, but for this digital real estate we're calling Blockspace. And trust me, it gets seriously interesting. So, ready for a thought experiment? Stick with me here. Imagine blockchain transactions are like a digital train. Every block is a train with a limited number of seats. And these trains, they depart at set times, say every 10 minutes, just like clockwork in the case of Bitcoin. Now, your transaction, it's desperately trying to get a seat on that train. And those transaction fees everyone talks about, that's basically you competing with everyone else for a seat. Higher fee. Think of it as priority boarding. Sounds simple enough on the surface, right? But what happens when suddenly everyone's scrambling for those limited seats?
Well, that's when things get really interesting. You end up with this system where the price of those tickets, the transaction fees, can swing wildly. Remember what happened with that OpenX exchange issue a while back?
Oh, yeah, vaguely.
So they had this minor bug, right? But it turned into $1 million mistake because their bots went totally haywire. Essentially, they started bidding against themselves for block space.
Wait, seriously, how much did that little mishap end up costing them?
Hold on to your hats, they racked up something like $18 million in fees. And it happened ridiculously fast.
Ouch. That's an expensive bug.
It really highlights how this whole fee market, as straightforward as it might seem, can be a bit of a minefield. And this wasn't some small fry operation either. We're talking a major player in the crypto space. This is exactly why the work Alkimiya is doing is so crucial. They're aiming to inject some much-needed stability and predictability into what can often feel like a chaotic landscape.
So it's kind of like they want to be the insurance provider for blockchain transactions?
That's a really good way to put it. Think about it. Airlines hedge against fluctuating jet fuel prices all the time, right? Alkimiya's vision is to do the same thing, but for blockchain businesses. They want to give those businesses the tools to manage the risk of those volatile transaction fees.
Makes perfect sense when you put it like that. The last thing you'd want is for your costs to go through the roof just because everyone and their grandma decided to make a transaction at the same time.
Exactly. And initially, their focus was actually on miners. They wanted to find a way for those miners to hedge their revenue streams. Because, let's be honest, mining revenue, that can be pretty unpredictable.
So they were like the original block space insurance brokers in a way.
You could say that, but their vision has evolved a lot since those early days. They realized that this need for hedging, for managing those fee fluctuations, it wasn't limited to just the miners. It actually impacts everyone who interacts with the blockchain in some way.
Okay, so they started with miners, but then tell me they pivoted to something even bigger and bolder.
They absolutely did. They decided to shift gears and build a full-blown marketplace for transaction fee futures. And they're starting with Bitcoin.
Interesting. Why Bitcoin first? Seems a bit basic, if you know what I mean.
Well, there are a couple of reasons for that.
Yeah.
First off, Bitcoin's fee market is, let's say, more straightforward than what you'd find on, say, Ethereum. It's a good testing ground for this kind of financial innovation because it's a bit less chaotic. Plus, think about it, transaction fees, they're the one universal language in the entire blockchain world, right?
Sure.
Doesn't matter if you're sending a few bucks to a friend or launching some incredibly complex DeFi application, you're going to be paying fees. And that translates to a massive pool of potential players in this market.
So they're using Bitcoin's simplicity to build something with the potential to be huge down the line.
Exactly. It's all about establishing a blueprint, something they can then adapt and apply into more complex ecosystems.
Which brings us to the elephant in the room, or maybe we should say the 800-pound gorilla, Ethereum. I have a feeling its fee market is a whole other beast.
Oh yeah, Ethereum's fees. That's a whole nother story altogether. But here's the thing. That complexity, it actually makes a block space market potentially even more valuable.
Okay, you've piqued my interest. Help me wrap my head around this. What makes Ethereum so different when it comes to fees?
All right, so remember our train analogy.
Yeah.
Bitcoin. That's like your straightforward commuter train. Everyone's pretty much heading in the same direction, just paying for their seat. Ethereum, though, it's more like a high-speed rail network. You've got different cars, different destinations, even different classes of service.
So more complexity, more things that can go right or wrong.
Exactly. And that complexity spills over into the fee market. Ethereum has all sorts of mechanisms for transaction fees. like paymasters, for example.
Paymasters. That sounds kind of ominous. Are these like the shadowy figures controlling Ethereum's fees from behind the scenes?
Huh. Not quite. Think of them more like concierges for your transactions. They
Huh?
basically streamline the whole user experience. And they can even help shield you from some of that fee volatility we were talking about earlier.
Okay, now you've got my attention.
For instance, you know how Coinbase rolled out that new wallet recently?
Yeah.
It lets users pay their gas fees in stablecoins, like USDC, instead of needing to hold ETH. That right there, that's a paymaster working its magic behind the scenes, taking on the risk of those ETH price swings.
Ah, so it's all about making things easier for the average user.
Convenience and risk management for sure. But here's the thing. Even with these paymasters, someone still has to deal with those crazy fee fluctuations. And that's where Alkimiya's idea of a block-based futures market becomes even more intriguing in the context of Ethereum.
So paymasters are like trying to tame the wild beast, but a futures market could be the ultimate weapon.
It's definitely a game changer. But let's not forget about another curveball in the world of Ethereum block space: pre-confirmations.
Pre-confirmation. Sounds like we're getting into sci-fi territory now. Is this like time travel for transactions?
Not quite time travel, but definitely a bit futuristic.
Yeah.
Imagine being able to lock in your spot on that Ethereum train. Remember our analogy?
Right, right.
But weeks, even months in advance. That's the potential of pre-confirmations.
Seriously. How does that even work?
Think of it like reserving your block space ahead of time. Instead of scrambling for a seat on that train as it's pulling away from the station, you've got a guaranteed spot waiting just for you. Now, there are different models they're experimenting with, like proposer-driven versus builder-driven, each with its own quirks, of course.
Proposers and builders. So are we talking about like digital construction crews now?
Huh. In a way, yeah. You see, proposers, they're like the foremen, the validators who decide which transactions actually make it into a block. They've got a lot of say when it comes to putting those transactions in order, and that has a big impact on fees. Builders, on the other hand, are more like specialized contractors. They're the ones packaging up those transactions, trying to make them as profitable as possible for themselves and for the proposers.
Okay, that makes sense. But I'm guessing this whole pre-confirmation thing isn't without its challenges, right?
You got it. Figuring out the pricing is a major hurdle. I mean, how do you accurately put a price tag on something that's basically a bet on the future demand for block space? It's a bit of a wild west out there right now. Everyone's trying to crack the code on how to value these things properly.
So a ton of experimentation going on and probably a lot of opportunities for, let's say, creative interpretations of the rules.
You could say that. It reminds me of the early days of options markets
Mhm.
in traditional finance. Pure chaos until people figured out how to price those contracts. We're seeing a similar story unfold with pre-confirmations.
Potentially game-changing, but still early days.
Exactly. And all of this is unfolding against the backdrop of another major development in the Ethereum world, the rising influence of these block builders we were just talking about.
Ah, yes, those digital construction crews. What's the story there?
Well, remember how we were saying they have a lot of sway over how blocks are assembled?
Yeah, kind of like deciding who gets the best seats in first class on that blockchain train.
Precisely. And just like in any industry where you have a handful of players holding most of the cards, there are concerns about too much power being concentrated in too few hands.
So if you've got just a handful of these block builders controlling the flow of transactions, doesn't that kind of go against the whole idea of a decentralized system?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Hmm.
And it's causing quite a stir in the Ethereum community, that's for sure. Some people say this concentration of power, it's a necessary evil, at least for now while things are still developing. Others are pushing for some pretty radical changes. They want to see block building become more decentralized.
Radical, you say. Give me an example. What kind of changes are we talking about?
Okay, so one idea that's been floating around is called concurrent block production. Now try to picture this. Instead of having just one train track, you've got multiple trains running side by side, each one carrying a different set of transactions. That's the basic concept behind concurrent block production. It could really shake things up, potentially reduce the influence of those big block builders we were talking about.
So more competition, a more level playing field. Sounds promising in theory, but I'm guessing it's not quite that simple in practice, is it?
You're right, it's definitely not a walk in the park. It's a huge technical challenge. And there's always the risk of unintended consequences.
Huh.
Like, for example, it could actually make it harder to reach consensus on the blockchain, which could slow the whole system down. But hey, that's what makes this whole space so exciting, right? Always evolving, always something new around the corner.
It's like watching a city being built in fast forward. And speaking of growth, we've spent a lot of time on Bitcoin and Ethereum. But what about all those other blockchains out there? Are any of them getting in on this whole block space market action?
Oh, absolutely. They're definitely exploring the possibilities. Polkadot, for instance, they've got this interesting concept called parathreads.
Hmm.
It's basically like having these smaller specialized blockchains, all connected to the main Polkadot network. And they've been looking at ways to make those parathreads more dynamic, more driven by market forces.
So it's kind of like they're building a network of mini blockchains all interconnected, each with its own little block space market.
Exactly. But I'll be honest, Polkadot's approach, it's still pretty niche. Even for people who are already deep into the crypto world, it's super interesting from a technical perspective, no doubt. But for the average user, it might be a bit too much.
Yeah, I can see that. So for now, it sounds like Ethereum is still the main stage when it comes to this whole block space revolution.
For the time being, yeah, I'd say so. But keep an eye on Solana. They've been making waves with their high-speed network, and their fees are super low. They're starting to attract a lot of developers who are building these applications that need a ton of block space. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there, how their whole approach to block space management compares to Ethereum's.
It's incredible, really, when you think about it. It's like we're witnessing the birth of this entirely new economic system with its own set of rules, its own power dynamics.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And as with any new market, especially one that's evolving this rapidly, there's a ton of uncertainty, a lot of experimentation, and a huge amount of opportunity.
So, for those of us listening who are maybe still trying to connect all the dots, what's the big takeaway here? What's the one thing we should really be paying attention to?
It's pretty simple, really. As more and more people and businesses start using blockchains for, well, practically everything from sending money to building these decentralized applications, this block space is only going to become more and more valuable. Think of it like this. It's the digital foundation upon which this entire ecosystem is being built. So whether you're a developer, an investor, or just someone who's curious about the future of technology, understanding how this market works, how it's changing, and who holds the reins is going to be absolutely crucial.
It reminds me a bit of the early days of the internet. Back then, nobody really gave much thought to things like bandwidth or server space. Now it's all we seem to talk about.
Exactly. It's a perfect analogy. Back then, we were all just blown away by the fact that we could send emails across the world. Now we're streaming 4K movies on demand and attending meetings in the metaverse. That's the kind of trajectory we're on with blockchains, too. As these technologies mature, the things we might take for granted today, like having cheap and plentiful block space, those could very well become tomorrow's most sought-after resources.
Mind blowing. So while everyone else is busy chasing the next big meme coin, the real story might be unfolding quietly in the background in this battle for block space.
Now you're getting it. It might not always be the most glamorous or attention-grabbing topic, but trust me, it's the foundation upon which this entire industry is being built.
Well said. I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today. A huge thank you to Leo Zhang and the Epicenter podcast for giving us so much to unpack. That's it for today's deep dive into the world of block space. We've waded through the technical jargon, explored the economic forces at play, and even caught a glimpse of a future where block space could be just as valuable as, well, beachfront property. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep into this fascinating world of blockchain technology.